Being a pilot is a job of responsibilities. All of the passengers rely on you for their life, but sometimes pilots get too overconfident about themselves and commit human errors that lead to a dreadful accident. We've compiled some of the most dreadful plane crashes that you could have otherwise prevented, so put your seatbelts on and let's begin. Number 1. Tenerife Aeroflot Flight 593. It was a cloudy and rainy day at Tenerife's Los Rodeos airport as passengers began to board Aeroflot Flight 593. They were excited to be heading to Hong Kong, looking forward to exploring new sights and experiencing new adventures, but little did they know that their dreams would be shattered in an instant. The flight was piloted by Captain Yaroslav Kudrinsky, a veteran pilot with many years of experience. He had his family with him on the flight, including his wife, son, and daughter. As the plane took off, everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, things took a dark turn when Captain Kudrinsky allowed his 15-year-old son to take the controls of the aircraft. The captain was confident that his son could handle it, but he was wrong. The teenager accidentally disengaged the autopilot, causing the plane to enter a steep bank and lose altitude rapidly. The passengers were thrown around the cabin as the plane descended rapidly towards the ground. Panic set in as they realized that something was wrong. They screamed and prayed for their lives as the plane hurtled towards the earth. The flight crew tried to regain control of the plane, but it was too late. The aircraft crashed into a mountain, killing all 75 passengers and crew on board. It was one of the deadliest aviation disasters in history. The aftermath of the crash was dark and chaotic. The wreckage was scattered across the mountain, and it took days to recover all the bodies. Families and loved ones of the victims were left to grieve their loss, struggling to come to terms with the tragedy. The investigation into the crash revealed that the captain's decision to allow his son to take the controls was a major contributing factor. The airline was criticized for their lack of oversight and training, and changes were made to improve safety standards in the industry. But for the families of the victims, the damage had already been done. They were left to grapple with the pain and trauma of losing their loved ones in such a senseless tragedy. The crash of Aeroflot 593 serves as a tragic reminder of the importance of safety in the aviation industry. It was a gloomy day for the families of the victims, and it remains a sobering reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of human error. Number 2. Aero Peru Flight 603. It was a clear night in Lima as passengers boarded Aero Peru Flight 603. They were excited to be heading to Santiago, Chile, looking forward to exploring a new city and experiencing new adventures, but little did they know their journey would end in tragedy. The flight was piloted by Captain Eric Schreiber, a veteran pilot with many years of experience. As the plane took off, everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, soon after takeoff, the cockpit became filled with smoke. The crew tried to remain calm, but it was clear that something was seriously wrong. They made an announcement to passengers telling them to remain calm and buckle their seatbelts, but as the smoke became thicker and more intense, panic set in. From the ATC side, the controller was able to provide the pilots with their position and altitude. However, unbeknownst to them, the source providing the altitude readings was the same source that gave the pilots faulty information earlier. The pilots were relying on false readings, believing that their altitude was matching up with ATC's. As the plane began its descent protocol, it became clear that the situation was far worse than anyone could have imagined. The plane was rapidly descending towards the water, with the confused pilots struggling to make sense of the faulty readings. The artificial horizon was telling them they were dangerously close to the water, but their altitude readings were telling them that they were still high in the air. Despite the dozens of alarms blaring in the cockpit, including terrain warnings, stick shakes, and wind shear alerts, the pilots were unable to regain control of the plane. The plane was dangerously close to the sea, and the pilots were desperately trying to avoid a crash. But it was too late. Suddenly, the water struck the plane, and the captain immediately pulled up, realizing their mistake. However, it was too late to avoid disaster. The left wing and engine were badly damaged by the impact, and the plane began to invert. The pilots were unable to regain control, and the plane crashed upside down into the Pacific Ocean with a devastating force around 1:20 a.m. The tragedy of Aero Peru Flight 603 was a devastating blow to the aviation industry and a heartbreaking loss for the families and loved ones of the victims. It serves as a haunting reminder of the importance of attention to detail and the devastating consequences of human error in the aviation industry. The memory of this tragedy will remain forever etched in the hearts and minds of those who were impacted by it. The plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean, killing all 70 passengers and crew on board. The aftermath of the crash was dark and chaotic. The wreckage was scattered across the ocean, and it took weeks to recover all of the bodies. Families and loved ones of the victims were left to grieve their loss, struggling to come to terms with the tragedy. The investigation into the crash revealed that the cause of the smoke in the cockpit was a simple but deadly mistake. The maintenance crew had left a piece of duct tape over a static port, which caused incorrect airspeed readings and other critical information to be sent to the cockpit. The crew was unable to make sense of the faulty information and ultimately lost control of the plane. The tragedy of Aero Peru Flight 603 serves as a haunting reminder of the importance of attention to detail in the aviation industry. A single mistake can have deadly consequences, and it's up to everyone involved to ensure that safety is always the top priority. Number 3. Saudi 163. The passengers of Saudi Flight 163 boarded the Lockheed L-1011-200 TriStar with high hopes and excitement for their journey from Riyadh to Jeddah, but their dreams were shattered by the incompetence of the flight crew and security personnel. The flight crew, made up of 3 individuals whose identities were never revealed, were a disaster waiting to happen. They lacked experience and failed to work together as a team. It took them over 4 minutes to detect a fire in the rear of the aircraft, and their bickering and insults towards each other only made the situation worse. Meanwhile, one of the passengers had brought a butane stove on board and began using it to boil water for tea. This reckless act resulted in a fire that quickly spread throughout the cabin. It was a tragedy that could have been easily prevented if the security personnel had hired the right people to screen the passengers and their belongings. As the flames grew larger and the smoke became thicker, panic and chaos spread throughout the cabin. The flight crew failed to prepare the passengers for evacuation and even denied a flight attendant's suggestion to do so. It was later theorized that the pilot's reluctance to take orders from a female flight attendant who happened to be of Pakistani origin was the reason behind its decision. In the midst of this chaos, the passengers turned to their faith, praying to Allah for mercy and salvation. And miraculously, this aircraft made a successful emergency landing at Riyadh, but the danger was far from over. Instead of evacuating the aircraft immediately after touchdown, the captain decided to let the landing proceed as normal. This decision proved fatal as the firefighting crews were positioned where the aircraft was expected to stop and not at the end of the runway. This could have been avoided if the right people had been in charge of the flight crew. The aircraft finally made it off the runway onto the taxiway, but it took the flight crew over 3 minutes to power down the engines. This delay was dangerous, as evacuating while the engines were still running was suicidal. In competent airlines, aircraft evacuations are expected to be completed in under 1.5 minutes, regardless of the aircraft size, but in this case, the delay cost precious minutes. 23 minutes later, the emergency crews outside the aircraft were finally able to get one of the doors opened, but it was too late. 3 minutes later, the aircraft burst into flames, killing all the 287 passengers and 14 crew members on board. It was a horrific scene, made worse by the fact that it was preventable. The tragedy of the Saudi Flight 163 was a result of the incompetence and negligence of those responsible for the safety of the passengers. It was a stark reminder of the importance of hiring the right people, especially when it comes to the aviation industry. The families of those who perished on that fateful day will forever mourn their loss, and the rest of the world will never forget the lessons learned from this tragic event. And that's it for this episode. We'll see you in the next one.